Hey guys, it's Jeremy from jeremy.net, and I am doing one of my monthly figure drawing purges where I go through all of my work from the past month. This one's going to be a little bit longer because I realize, hang on, I'm adjusting the camera a little bit. I realized that I neglected to do one at the beginning of August for all the drawings I did through July. So now I've got a big stack of drawings from July and from August, and I'm gonna run through here and show you which ones I'm gonna photograph for my blog. Maybe a little bit of commentary on what I like and what I don't, what I'm learning in figure drawing classes. So let's start with the fact that let's see, I'm doing a class that has it's a long pose class on anatomy, light, and tone, taught by Carl Ganas at the Animation Guild, and in that class, we have an opportunity since we're doing poses that tend to be a little bit longer, as opposed to 3 minute, 5 minute more gestural poses. This class will do 10s, 15s, occasionally 25-minute poses. So I've got a little bit longer time. So this is an opportunity to work with toned paper. Normally, I don't really have enough time to get in there and get much detail in. And in this particular session, I'm not happy with a lot of the drawings I did at all, except for maybe I don't know, there's probably only like one or two I'm going to post on the blog because I've never really had a good sense of how to work with light and tone on toned paper. And this particular session was the first time it started to click for me. So I'll show you a couple in here. I mean, the big thing is just that there's not much definition here. My drawing is really light to try and leave room for the white chalk. I'm actually using a white General's pencil. But I try to leave enough room for the white to work that in for details, and it ends up being kind of patchy, and there's not much really drawn in there. This one, I think this was a 15, so I had a little bit more time. And this one actually is not bad. This will be one of the ones that will go into the blog. That said, this still isn't from the point where it really started to click for me. This is me just drawing sort of observationally, focusing on what are the light areas, what are the dark areas, and trying not to mix them. But when I get to the point where things start to click, I'll point out what changed. What's funny is even after it changed, there's still a lot of drawings that didn't come out well. But let's see here. Let's rotate this. This one, a little bit more dramatic lighting. I think that we turned off the light, one of the lights, the light on this side of the model, because the model is kind of like lit from two large lights. We turned off one on this side to just give us more dramatic lighting. But I didn't really get the sense that even though you can see kind of the cleft of the butt cheeks down here, I didn't really convey the fact that the hips are twisting so that where the upper body is kind of turning away, that the hips are now turned this way towards us. I didn't really convey that in this. I got the lighting of the form, but I didn't really get the turning, the transition in this area. So this drawing kind of fell down in that context. So I'm not gonna put that one up. Let's see here. Yeah, a lot of these are of torsos because when you're doing when you're doing drawing on toned paper, honestly, 10 or 15 minutes seems like a long time. It's still not a lot of time to get much detail in there. So you kind of have to, one of the things that Carl encourages us to do is just pick one area of the body and work on that. So sometimes it's been the torsos. I have a few where I've just worked on joints, elbows, knees, and some of those are actually in the larger drawings. This one, not much special about it. That one's not going in. Here's where I started trying to narrow it down a little bit more and just work on, like I was saying, let me just pick a limb or a joint. So on this one, instead of focusing on the torso, focusing not so much on the pelvis, but just on the two thighs, the upper legs. And again, I don't really think I want to put this one in because the main thing that I'm supposed to be doing is rendering the transition of volumes. So how do I make the main volume of this thigh the main volume of that thigh in terms of lighting it so it feels convincingly like a cylinder, egg-shaped kind of oblong cylinder, one moving kind of slightly towards you and one moving more directly towards you, but then doing the subtle anatomy of the actual muscles, but having them conform to the larger tone of the volume. And I still didn't get that on these. So yeah, those aren't going in. It's another 10-minute pose. I started putting on there, like in the corner of a set, I'll put whether it's a 10, a 15, or 5-minute poses or 2-minute poses. Because sometimes I'll do a drawing. I'm like, why is this so ragged? And I'm like, oh, because I only, spent 2 minutes on it. Let's see. This one's a 15. The 15s, I think this one will go in. That's not bad. A lot of the times, it really just comes down to having more time to work on the drawing. So, yeah, this one will go in. This one's not a bad drawing, but the fact that I didn't get any of the white in the figure at all, it just feels so incredibly unfinished to me. I mean, the nice thing about this one is that this one, I left enough of it open and I got enough of the actual figure drawing in there that I could go back and finish this drawing if I wanted to. Now, this is, I think, where I started hitting my turning point of things clicking. And let me see if I have it. Well, this was definitely the night. So, one of the other thing I was going to mention, part of the reason why I didn't get around to doing any of the white is because keeping my figures in proportion is always a constant battle for me. And I spent a lot of time on this drawing just trying to, sometimes you do a gesture and it's not right. You're like, oh, well, let me tweak it. It's still not right. Let me tweak it. It's still not right. And I spent most of this pose trying to fix the proportion and the gesture of it. And I just never got around to doing the actual white chalk part of the drawing. But in terms of things starting to click for me, let's see, when I did this pose, I made it a point to, I was thinking the way I normally do, like the one lesson I did take was not to mix my lights and my darks. So I clearly defined my light area, and then, I clearly defined my shadows, sort of blocked those in, and I didn't really put much detail in there because other people I've talked to, like, there's a coworker of mine, Paulo, who he actually teaches figure drawing as well, and he's always mentioned, a lot of detail tends to be in the halftones and the lights, and not so much in the shadows. And the shadows, a lot of detail kind of drops away unless you're in a low-key environment. So I thought, what if I forget about trying to get detail down in the shadows and try to focus mostly on the lights? Now, this is what clicked after this drawing. Is I said, well, what if I don't know if you've taken figure drawing classes before. There's something that I've heard from multiple figure drawing instructors, which is that your lightest shadow area, the absolute, like let's say there's a strong reflected light in here, coming from the figure, or just it happens to be, even it's turned away from the light, like the shoulder and in the shadow from the head. Let's say that there would still be a lighter area like this that's kind of closest to the light side. Whatever part in your shadow area, the absolute lightest shadow cannot be lighter than the darkest part of your light area. I know that sounds a little bit confusing, but basically the brightest shadow cannot be brighter than the darkest light. So in this area, the light, the hottest part, the brightest part is going to be the highlights, but even with that, there's going to be the halftones and areas of it turning away. But what would be considered a shadow in the light area should still never be darker than the brightest part of these shadows. And I thought about that, and I started thinking about the fact that when I did this drawing, I wasn't able to get a lot of detail into the light area. And I said, well, what would happen if I were to try and focus on treating the paper as that dividing line? Like if I say, all right, if the lightest light, if the darkest light couldn't be darker than the tone of the paper, and if the lightest shadow couldn't be darker than the tone of the paper, what if I use the paper as that midpoint? So that when I'm drawing on the light side, I actually will use the tone of the paper the way I would use, instead of using tone, instead of using the charcoal inside here, like on the linea alba, the dividing line of the abs. What if instead I were to use the tone of the paper for that? And this one didn't feel like a very good execution of it, but Let me see. Here's another one that was a 10-minute, and I didn't get much done in it. So that one's not going in either. But let's see. Here we go. So this drawing was me specifically saying, all right, instead of using shadow or tone, meaning charcoal, in this area, the figure was sort of lit very strongly from a forward light on the right side. So it got a lot of light in here, and really the shadows were just on the edges. What if within all of this light range, I were to treat what would normally be, all right, it's shadow because it's shrinking away from the form. What if I did all of that with the tone of the paper? So not using any dark with it. And then within the dark, any areas like in here, even though the underside of the leg is turned away, there's a rounding of the form coming out from the lower part of the leg pressed against. Actually, no, this is the outside of the thigh, but it's being pressed against the floor and it's coming out towards you a little bit, so it's a little bit lighter. But instead of doing that with chalk, I'm letting the paper be the lighter areas. And that's kind of how I started treating this figure. And it really sort of broke things open for me. Now, here's a challenge I usually have in figure drawing class is I have a lot of these ideas that I'm working on, trying to understand, trying to study. And when you're doing it in real time in front of a model, you don't necessarily have the patience to work through them. Now, even though I had this, what I felt like was a huge breakthrough, I came up from figure drawing class that night and I did a bunch of sketches just to sort of see if I understood the concept. And I'm going to step away real quick and grab another sketchbook I have on the side. Let's see. I see Ian Rocks popped in. He said, I went to the bathroom and had a psychic flash like, Jeremy is streaming. It's like, that's awesome, man. You can feel me in the ether. When I'm online, it's like the internet starts crackling. The YouTubes are crackling. It means Jeremy's streaming. Okay, so I've got a little small sketchbook that I keep for, like, if I'm doing tone studies. This sketchbook I actually keep with all my figure drawing gear, specifically just for when I'm doing it in class. This one is a small one I keep with me if I'm coming back and I'm doing studies of these drawings. The same way that I do my fixing bad figure drawings, I do the same thing in tone drawings occasionally, and I'll do it in a smaller sketchbook to sort of look at it and study and rework things. But what I specifically did this time was, instead of studying my drawings, I found somebody who does really great tonal drawings, Pierre Prudhomme. And I went through, you should take a look at his drawings, Prud hyphen, or yeah, apostrophe HON. It's Pierre Prudhomme. He is somebody who does tonal drawings that look like photographs. He is amazing. Let's see. By the way, if you're, some people are wondering, like Ian Rocks mentioned in the chat here, they didn't receive a notification that I was on because normally the little bell goes on. Yeah, that notification on YouTube is getting a little weird. Sometimes even if you have it checked, stuff doesn't necessarily pop up. I'm not sure why, but if you want to make sure you know anytime that I'm streaming or posting a new video, make sure you check, not just subscribe, but check that little bell for the notifications. So, Prudhomme, I ended up doing studies of some of his drawings because he very clearly defines tone. He very clearly defines anatomy and volume with both white chalk and shadow. Now, in his drawings, he had a lot more detail in his shadows. He clearly defined the forms within the shadow more. But that wasn't the goal for this study. The goal for this study was separating a shadow area and then trying to use the white chalk in combination with the actual gray of the paper and using the gray of the paper like it's shadows that I'm drawing in. So I ended up staying up for like 2 hours just doing studies after figure drawing class, and I'll run you through a couple of those. I see American Swordfish popped in the chat. Good to see you. Thanks for stopping by. Let's see. So we've got that one. Here's another one, and this one had a strong reflected light. And I specifically originally I was just going to do the study and be like, all right, let me move on and get some other stuff done. But I wanted to come in, and this was originally all shadowed in, and I had a little bit of the darker tone doing the underside of the breast and the stomach folding. But I went in with a eraser and pulled out as much of the shadow as possible so I could really get that sense of the strong reflected light that's in here. So you can see how powerful the tone of the paper can be. It can really feel like a bright light. Now, true, it is not any brighter than, it never gets brighter than what's in the light areas, because the darkest part again of the white area like this, where it's turning away, the shadow of the whites is still the tone of the paper. So that's kind of me trying to practice and execute this idea. And again, these drawings are nowhere near as detailed as Prudhomme's. If you follow my blog or on my mailing list, you'll see I actually post this side by side with Prudhomme's drawings, so you can compare what I was studying with versus what I drew. Also, it's one of those things where I just want to make sure I make it clear that I'm not making these up myself. When I'm doing master studies, I always want to attribute give proper attribution to the person I'm studying from. So let's see here. It's another one, and this is one that I'm going to come back and redraw at some point, because Prudhomme had a really nice twist in the upper body, and it's actually twisting more and then turned a little bit more towards the viewer than what I have drawing here. And it was one of those things where I just want to redraw it because it was such a beautiful contrapposto twist of the torso that I wanted to study that. I didn't go back and do it in this drawing only because I'm like, the goal in this is for me to study the lighting and how I could render with just the white and the tone of the paper. I see a quick question in the chat. American Swordfish asked, can you cheat lighting? Well, first off, yes, you can cheat just about anything. You can cheat lighting, you can cheat proportion, you can cheat foreshortening, you can cheat environments. But the challenge in cheating something is that you have to have a lot of knowledge in order to cheat it properly, because you need to understand what the effect you're trying to convey. Because there's an expression, if something looks right, then it is right. Meaning that a lot of times you can get away with something that's anatomically incorrect, or it's not necessarily properly lit, or it's lit in a way that you would never observe in real life. But if it creates the effect that you want and the viewer accepts it, like if that lighting is consistent in terms of like, it doesn't make the anatomy look wonky, or it doesn't make the figure pop out of the background in the wrong way, if the whole thing works, even if it's not, by the laws of physics and how we observe light and form correct, it's right if you make it work. So yes, you can cheat just about anything, but the challenge a lot of times is having enough knowledge to know how to sell that thing that you're cheating. And sometimes if you don't have that level of knowledge, it's almost easier to just say, all right, I'm just going to stick with the rules and just do it the way that actually looks like how it should look. Because there's plenty of things I've drawn where I can't pull off the cheat. I've tried to cheat things. I've tried to cheat foreshortening, and I look at it and there's a hand coming out at you at a weird angle. And I thought, well, I know what I'm going for here, and I'm going to try and light it like this. I'm like, he's just not selling it. It's better to just not do the foreshortening, or do the foreshortening without whatever cool cheat I was going to have and just do it from a longer shot so you can see more of the figure. Or like, for instance, a lot of times a cheat, this isn't really a cheat. This is just clarifying in drawings. But the way that this figure's arm is going out like this, a lot of times if you're drawing a character or you're drawing a pose, it's difficult for me to show without having my whole arm up in here. But let's say that someone is reaching directly out at you, but when they reach directly out at you, you really lose a lot of that form. Sometimes just by moving it out to the side a little bit so you can see a little bit more of the angle of it, it becomes less confusing. In terms of cheating lighting, it really depends on what the effect is that you're trying to go for. In that case, I think research is helpful in the sense of having, looking at photo reference of both the effect that you are trying to cheat in terms of what you're trying to create, like what is the thing that you want it to actually look like, and then pulling off reference of what are ways that this thing normally looks like, and kind of comparing the two. And this isn't like spending a whole afternoon doing a research project. This is like hopping on the internet, doing a quick Google search, pulling up 2 or 3 images of something lit in a way that you imagine it being lit, and then maybe 2 or 3 images of how is this thing normally lit in life to show its forms, its volumes, and then comparing the two. And then you just try to kind of make a visual mashup. I'm a big fan of doing a couple of different thumbnails. If I'm trying to do something that I don't know I can pull off, I may do a few different lighting studies before I draw the actual thing. Like, I mean, you see with my thumbnails in comics how many drawings I do just to get one panel. Sometimes I may be able to do 2 or 3 sketches of a particular panel. Sometimes I may end up drawing an entire like sheet, like entire A4 or 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, just filled with sketches of me working out what is the right pose for this image or this angle. So, yes, you can cheat just about anything, but you need a lot of knowledge to do it. So let me see. I think that's all the Prudhomme studies. Let me see. Is there one more in here? Yeah, there's one more. And like I said, if you go to newsletter.jeremy.net, sign up for my blog, for my newsletter, you'll see this kind of stuff on a weekly basis. If you just go to, I think it's blog.jeremy.net, or if you just go to jeremy.net and look at blog on the side, you can scroll through there and you can find the comparison with this and the original Prudhomme pages. I mean, the original Prudhomme drawings. Let's see. Ion Rock says, I've been trying to immerse myself in fantasy so I can reignite my passion for illustration. Yes. Research is one of the best ways to get yourself out of a creative funk, because when you go and you look at the cool work that other people are doing and the stories that get you excited, it makes you want to challenge yourself and to try and tell more stories. I know for myself, I don't go to San Diego Comic-Con that much anymore because I have a hard time enjoying myself. Not because the show is bad, but literally I will walk around there, and after 1 or 2 hours of seeing all of the cool work that so many people are creating, like walking through Artist Alley, I'm just like, I should be home drawing. I see the beautiful work that other people are doing, and I don't feel competitive. I feel like they're putting great artwork out into the world and they're busting their ass. Why am I here just wandering around looking at stuff? I need to be home making. So a lot of times, like for the most part, when I go to comic conventions, it's usually just as an exhibitor, because it's neurotic, but I have a hard time enjoying myself just walking around at conventions. Because when I see people make cool shit, it makes me want to make cool shit. It's an ecosystem. It inspires each other. You feed creativity into it and creativity comes back out. So for anybody out there that's in a creative funk, go read a great novel that's in a genre that you're interested in. Go look at an art book or go to a museum. Go enjoy the beautiful things that other people are making, and that will inspire you to make more stuff. So this is me trying to get more refinement of that concept, of using the shadow as using the tone paper as shadow in the lights area. And another challenge that I had in this was that I probably had more tone in this area than I really intended. Like realistically, even though I drew some tone in here, I probably should have erased all of that and just said like, all right, the figure is just on the right side. I mean, the shadow is just on the left side of the figure. The light's just on the right side. Probably the extra tones that's in here is not conveying as much. No, it's not. It gets confusing with the extra tone in here, in terms of conveying the sense of volume that I wanted. So I will, I'm probably not gonna come back and redraw this one. Well, I might at some point with the tone paper, with the my little mini sketchbook for studies. This one was me responding to that other previous drawing where I said, all right, this is the shadow area. And there was more shadow down here, but then really just trying to do most of the figure just in light. And I let go of trying to get the whole figure done. And I really just said, all right, in here, I'm going to do shadows here. I had to do, there was a little bit of a cast shadow underneath the arm. So that area, I ended up putting more charcoal in there, charcoal pencil. But for the most part, I really just focused on having light and having it round away, and then light and then having the form, just focusing on turning the form with that balance between the chalk, the tone of the paper, and then charcoal. By the way, for anyone watching this video, if you're watching it on replay, go ahead and go through the chat, because American Swordfish and Iron Rocks are having a really interesting conversation about how comic conventions aren't necessarily about comics anymore, and a lot of the different media that's in there. And it's a conversation I've had many times. I may chime in if they ask, but I'm going to keep running through in terms of the figure drawings, because I actually have not even gotten to the paper drawing, the newsprint drawings yet. And there's more of those than there are of the tone paper ones. So this is a poor execution of the concept. I just didn't really get into. Let's see, it's a 10-minute pose, but that's no excuse. I really didn't get into depicting any of the volume at all. I mean, even the part on the shadow side, it just feels like it's a wonky, bad drawing. So that's definitely not going into the blog. Now, on this side, this one is a little bit closer, better execution of what I was going for, but it's still a little twisted. And twist, when I say twisted, I mean the sense of the form sort of twisting the torso this way versus the upper torso, the pecs and the rib cage. It feels like there's a turn going on in here, but I didn't properly convey it. It's more that there's a subtle S curve of the lower torso coming out and down. I didn't really get that sense in here, and I didn't do a good job of sculpting, of really clearly defining the forms of the pecs in the using the tone of the paper as my shadows. So that one's not really a good job going in. It's just a little too patchy. This one, a lot of times I'll do one drawing, something's wrong, and what I do in the next drawing is me trying to respond to that. So in this one, I try to create a kind of a hard edge in terms of not just, oh, this is a highlight, but also saying this form ends here, and then the pecs start here. Now, the transition from the pec to the deltoid is a bit wonky. I create a clear definition, but it doesn't seem to flow in there. Also, my good buddy Vince Moore just popped up into the chat. Hey, Vince, thanks for stopping by. Hope you're having a good Sunday. Going through some of my figure drawings. So, in this one, I haven't decided. Maybe this will be in the blog, maybe it won't. You'll be surprised if you see it in a few months from now. There's things about it really in the pecs and the upper rib cage that I'm happy with. And there's things in the rest of the form that I feel like I didn't really get around to defining well. This one, I think I will put in. It's not the best drawing that I've done, but given the time that we had in class, I think I did a better job of describing or clearly blocking out the pecs, the ab muscles, and the lower abs, probably than I've done in other drawings. And actually also even just the definition in here between the pecs going into the deltoid and then down into the bicep. I think this is me getting a little better in terms of focused practice on defining forms with the white chalk and the tone of the paper versus the charcoal and the tone of the paper. So this one's me kind of getting better at that. And American Swordfish also popped in again, said, I think you can cheat more with plus size figures. Well, you know what? You might be right. I haven't really framed it that way in my mind. In my mind, I'm generally thinking about a volume. So it doesn't really matter to me if it's a skinny cylinder or a wide cylinder. It's a very elongated ellipse versus a really rounded, almost spherical ellipse. When it comes down to it, I still need to define where the light is coming from because light helps define the form. I would really need to mull that one over. I don't know if I've got a good answer for that, or I don't really have thoughts on it. I would need to experiment with the idea and play with it a little bit, drawing plus size figures versus more muscular, slender figures in terms of cheating the lighting on them. Seeing, but also it comes back to what I was saying before about cheating. Cheating it is really just a matter of what are you trying to say with that form? Because if you're just drawing what you're trying to describe, that's not really cheating it. You're just drawing it. A cheat has to be what I think of when I think of a cheat is you're trying to sell something visually that isn't realistic. And then it comes to, well, what is it you're trying to cheat? Are you trying to make this figure, is the cheat trying to make it fit into this particular environment? Is the cheat trying to make them show more detail than they would see in a room that's, like, let's say they're in a dark room, but you want more detail of them than would really be there? Or you're trying to render let's say they're also in a very bright room or an outdoor scene, but you want more shadows in them than would normally be seen in an area this bright. Those are also types of cheats. There's all kinds of types of cheats with lighting. It really comes down to what are you trying to say. So I think that when it comes to cheats, it comes down to specific examples because there's a whole different, every single drawing problem is going to have a different response and answer to it. It's too broad of a topic to give a flat answer to. All right. So this is the stuff that I drew on newsprint. There's some notes at the top about me, that not about me, but that I made during class. Like sometimes I think about things that I need to remember, like trying to use the long lines of action as much as possible, because I'm trying to get into the habit of seeing the whole form. And a big part of that is understanding the silhouette of the figure, because that's one of the things where a lot of times, I'm sure many of you have seen this, where you draw a drawing looks less like a drawing of a figure than a collection of body parts. I am very guilty of drawing a collection of body parts. So I've been trying to think about the whole form, and one of the things that helps me with that is the silhouette. And I try to think of what is the gesture of the silhouette. And then I try to start carving in volumes and think of what are the volumes within the silhouette. And I give myself room to, like, if I draw the silhouette and then the volumes don't necessarily agree with it, I just say, well, what is it that I want more? If I want to fit in that silhouette, I change the volumes. If I like those volumes, I change the silhouette. But it's one of those things, that's the challenge of drawing the live figure. It's kind of thinking on your feet and being open to changing and being able to respond dynamically to the experience of looking at a live human in front of you and drawing the pose they're expressing. I think the only one on this page that I'm probably going to put on the blog is this one. I like the pose on this, but again, this one's pretty unfinished. You know what? I'm not sure about this one. I have a thing, Ron Velasco, when he was teaching the anatomy light and tone class, I think it was at the beginning of 2018, or maybe it was at the end of last year. But I took a class with him, and I like the pose. One of the things that he showed us, and it's a technique that I've heard of before, and I've mentioned it in blogs. I've heard of it, but just never did it. But instead of drawing on tone paper, to just shade in the paper with charcoal, like overall, and then draw into that and pulling the lights out with an eraser. And I really like that look. This is a case where I think the drawing itself isn't really a great drawing, but the technique is pleasing. And that's one of the things I actually try to fight against, because if I find a style that I think is cool, I'll lean into it, and that becomes not a cheat, but it becomes a crutch. I'm doing a cool style, but not really saying anything underneath. It's like those things like doing blood splatters with a paintbrush or a toothbrush where the splatter effects look cool. People respond to them visually, optically. There's something about it that's engaging and exciting. But if you use it all the time at the expense of actually learning better draftsmanship, you're not helping yourself grow as an artist. So I don't know for sure if I'm going to put this one in. I'm leaning towards no, because... And I see Iron Rocks popped in. He likes to proportion the pose, and I appreciate that. What's making me lean away from it is that I'm not doing a very great job, I think, of actually describing the volumes beyond just the silhouette of the pose. So we'll see. Now, see this one. This is also a longer pose. I can guarantee you that this was a 15, not a 10. This one, I think, gets a great pose in terms of the shift of that one shoulder going much higher up than just the rib cage, which is actually leaning kind of a little bit forward and away from us, and this shoulder down. I feel like that shift between the shoulders is great, the shift of the weight in the hips, and then actually not covering, but expressing the light area and the raised area of the collarbone coming off of the rib cage, then going down into the breasts, again defining the rib cage with light, more with light than with shadow. These are all things that I, in the past, have not been that great at. And mind you, I've been taking figure drawing classes for over a decade consistently. And the fact that a decade of study, and I still feel like there's a lot that I'm learning and just now starting to get a bit of facility towards. This doesn't mean that there's no hope for you or that you're not going to learn faster than I do. It may just be that I'm really thick headed and slow at learning. Your mileage may vary. This one is going in the blog. American Swordfish asked if I have some back figures, and I am sure that I do. We will go through here and see. Sorry, I just stepped away to organize some of these drawings. There's a little bit of a pile on the floor, and I want to make sure I don't step on them, and I keep the ones that I am going to photograph separate. You know, it's funny because I was talking to my wife the other night about the fact that I'm eventually going to start a Patreon channel coming up soon, or a Patreon campaign. And a big part of it is I don't want to make an extra work for myself. And a lot of the stuff that I share online, my whole thought behind it is that I'm just sharing what I would be doing anyway. I still need to go through and separate the drawings that I'm going to be photographing for my blog. So why not share that process with you? Hang on, I'm going to adjust the camera a little bit higher so you can see probably more of the top of the artboard. Not that there's something dramatically different up there, but yeah, there we go. Just moving the camera up a little bit higher so you can see sort of the top of what I've got going on up there. Apologize for the shaky camera. It'll stabilize in a minute. So, yeah. I'm sure that I've got some back poses in here, and we will get to those. Let's see. But this one I don't think will go into the blog. Again, it just comes down to, did I learn anything in this drawing? That's what I'm more interested in. It's not necessarily, is it a good drawing? Is it a bad drawing? It's what did I learn? And in this one, I was going for the idea of trying to have the muscles of the quadriceps sort of going down into the kneecap and wrapping around and trying to describe those muscular divisions. But I don't think I did a very good job of it on this side. I mean, I did kind of create a sense of the planes and the volumes in terms of not planes and volumes, but the separation of the main quadriceps from the iliotibial band coming on the side. But on this one, it's just a streak of white going down the middle. It's something that could have been expressive, and it just turned into nothing. So that one's not going in. This one, I think I'm going to put in. Now, the lighting, as I'm looking at it here, is not well done as it should be, because there should be more shadow in this part of the thigh that's coming around here. Like, there was a lot of foreshortening of the form coming out, but I think I got a little bit too exaggerated in here. That it feels like with this form, there should be a lot more shadow. It should be a lot darker, and like this underside should be kind of turning away from the form more, and you should only be getting light as it wraps up and around here to kind of match the lighting that's in the front part of the figure. That said, I think that this is probably one of the better jobs I did of trying to sculpturally describe form in terms of what direction is an object facing. This surface, the kneecap itself, is facing the light, and as soon as you go around the side of it to the side of the leg, it's facing away, that it's not getting hit from above with direct lighting, that it's actually darker, a little bit slightly darker on the top than it is in those front surfaces facing the light. So this is what I'm going for, trying to make it feel like it's a carved object. I mean, that's something that, again, referring to Carl Ganas, he mentioned looking a lot at Michelangelo. It's one of his big influences in terms of draftsmanship, one of the artists he recommends everyone study. Yeah, kind of a no duh moment. But that's the whole thing is Michelangelo, he's a great sculptor, but his drawings reflect the fact that he's trying to make things feel sculptural. So I think that this one will go in. It's not a great drawing, but it's a drawing that shows me I'm happy with me getting a bit of understanding of the things I'm struggling with. Don't worry, next week it'll be back to comic books. But figure drawing is very important for me because I feel like that's what I'm that's what makes me a better comic book artist is studying the human figure live. It's been the biggest part of my educational growth. I mention it all the time. That's the reason why I'm always going on and on about it. Let's see. Iron Rocks also chimed in the chat. I've been contemplating the term cartoonist lately. Well, feel free to mention more about your thoughts in the chat. Maybe it'll turn into a topic of conversation. For me, I just view cartoonist as just a subset of artists. Some artists are more illustrative. Some artists are realists. Some artists are imaginative realists. Cartoonists are ones who, in my mind, they exaggerate. You know what? It's not even that they exaggerate. They get to the essence of what they're trying to communicate. They are not necessarily about drawing, the eyelashes on a figure and eyes are exactly shaped. They're drawing more of the emotional side. Like if you look at Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics, he has a chart where on one hand it's got a cartoon happy face, just like the two dots in the mouth and a round head. The other end of the extreme, it's got a near photorealistic rendering of a human face. And then what he shows is the transitions in between the two. And kind of in the middle is where comic books sit. But the happy face, cartooning tends to be on that side. It's just you're drawing. The idea is that something that is iconic and symbolic is universal. The happy face is universal. Someone who's black, white, Asian, Indian, Puerto Rican, Finnish, people from all around the world can see themselves in a drawing of a happy face. Whereas the photorealistic or realistically rendered figure or face is very specific to a person. It's to their particular features and their ethnicity, their age, their gender, what have you. With cartooning, there's strength in that, in the fact that it's symbolic and that a lot of people can respond to it. You're drawing the essence of what people are thinking and feeling. And when you have a character, you can have a character exaggerate and have like hearts popping out of their eyes, and it's what you're bringing their feelings out of their eyes. It would look weird to have a photorealistic character with hearts popping out of their eyes unless you're doing something that's sort of a artistic commentary, more of a fine art piece, or if there's a specific reason why you're playing with things that way. What's really interesting is looking at, say, the work of Bill Sienkiewicz. Like if you go back and look at Stray Toasters or Electra Assassin, how much he plays with realism against cartooning. Because there's some extremely cartoony shit in that book, and in both of those books. And there's also extremely beautiful, realistic paintings in those books. So he's a really interesting guy to look at for defining what we think our conceptions of both cartoony and realism is. And for me, the artists that are the most interesting are the ones who defy our expectations. Okay, so here is a back view. So I don't know, American Swordfish, we were talking about backs, if you were talking about backside. I kind of got the feeling from the fact that you like the thickness that you were kind of thinking of the lower torso. But this is just me studying. It really just comes down to the rib cage, not the rib cage, the spinal column and the shoulder blades. That's really, this drawing is almost all about shoulder blades and trying to understand on both sides, both the shadow side and the light side, how those are defining what's going on within the form. So I don't think this one's going to go in because I don't think there's enough specificity here. It's not a bad drawing. Like I actually really like the fact of getting like the breast that's turned away, having the muscles going up underneath the deltoid, or underneath the bicep and the deltoid, going into the arm muscles, going into the armpit. That's something that generally I tend to struggle with, and I feel like I conveyed it here in a subtler, simpler way. And that's not me saying this like patting myself on the back, because it's not that it's a great drawing. He said it's something that I tend to struggle with, and I feel like I was able to express it in a simpler way. And being able to express things in a simple way, like cartooning, is powerful because you can work faster. If you can say what you want to say in 5 words instead of 10, it allows you to get to the point, and you can say more in less time. This one I will put in. The knees are one of the hardest things for me to draw. I constantly am struggling with them. This knee is over labored. I feel like the kneecap should be, even though these details of like the tendons and the muscles as they turn around the joint, they have detail in them, but I made them feel a little bit too separate instead of part of the whole of the kneecap. So there's too much going on in this particular region, but where it did succeed was in defining these things as volumes sculpturally, as I mentioned before, about kind of Michelangelo. Like specifically in this area, they feel more like 3D objects. That's something that I've been chasing for many, many years, and I think that I'm making progress. That's what I'm going to say from now on. When I do a drawing and it captures something that I wanted to do, I'm going to say I'm making progress. Because I think like most artists, I don't feel comfortable giving myself a pat on the back because the world is full of brilliant, talented, creative people that can do basically any particular thing in art, like whether it's anatomy, proportion, volume, storytelling. You can pick somebody and you're like, well, these people can do it way better than you do. In the end, you're the artist that you are, and you're the sum of these things. It's how you bring all these different facets of picture making together that makes you the artist you are. So I don't want to get caught up in comparisonitis, but I also don't want to make it sound like, oh shit, I draw the best, like, you know, pec muscles going into armpits, because I don't. Let's see here. American Swordfish jump back in. Some challenge and a fun one for me is to differentiate an European versus an Asian face. Yeah, I've got a book called Facial Expressions, and it just has a wide variety of different ages, genders, ethnicities, all doing different facial expressions, almost like a model sheet for animation, but it's photographic reference. And it's there for artists to sit and study from and get a handle on expressing those different cultures. And I got that because I feel like that is also one of my weaknesses. My faces and my figures are still a little bit too generic. And I think that I try not to let that stop me from making comic books. What I try to do is write the stories I want to write and tell the stories I want to tell. And I try to give myself reasons to practice these things I'm bad at in each picture. Like particularly in Morningstar, there's archangels of different ethnicities, so I can practice drawing those ethnicities in the book. And in some panels, you're like, oh, I can tell that Remiel is Asian. In some panels, I'm like, I can't tell what she is. There's also panels where I'm like, okay, this might be getting a little bit too much into cartooning in a negative way in terms of enforcing visual stereotypes of characters' facial features. And I try to pull away from that, but it's all part of the exercise of continuing to grow. And so I try to do learning on the job with my comics. So if you see stuff in there and it's a little wonky, it's like, hey, that's me taking a swing. And sometimes I take a swing and I miss. Sometimes I take a swing and I hit it. Sometimes I take a swing and I'm like, oh, I didn't quite do it. Let me redraw that panel again. I don't think there's anything on this page that's particularly worth posting on the blog. These are all 2-minute poses, so really sketchy and loose. A little bottom side for you there, American Swordfish. You're not going to get the round booty that you really want from my 2-minute poses, but there'll be a few more backside poses in there. Something I made a point to note in myself, because I don't tend to draw it that way, but specifically that the lower leg is actually shorter than the upper leg because it tucks up underneath the kneecap, and the bones of the femur are actually the ones that hang out in the front. It's not like, they go out a bit, then the kneecap is out here, but then this part, the lower leg actually kind of tucks underneath there. So that's something that I realized, oh, wait, I need to draw that, pay attention to that detail because that's going to affect one of the reasons why I tend to draw legs folded over poorly. So let's see. Let's see. These are all, I think, probably, yeah, these are some 5-minute 5-minute poses. And I'm trying to kind of specifically work on like keeping attention to where the lighting is falling on the figure, trying to keep the light running through the main form. And also just a little diagram of here, me trying to understand where the energy is going in the form. Like looking at an abstract level in terms of the form, the way that the energy of the gesture runs through the figure, up and around, twisting in and out. And these are all things that I try to pay attention to so that when I'm drawing, I can look for how does this hand relate to this twist of the hip, versus the far elbow versus the foot. And I'm constantly trying to look around and keep the inner relationship between all of these things. And these are things I'm not saying, oh, they're in every drawing of mine. I'm making notes of them because I realize that they're there and I don't put them in my drawings. So, and when I say I don't, I mean that's a failure that I'm trying to correct by making these notes. So I don't think there's a lot in here that I necessarily want to put in. These feel more like gestury drawings, but there's nothing in there that I'm like, oh, this belongs in the blog. So, I mean, I'll probably keep these notes for myself, but I don't think that there's necessarily something I'm going to photograph for the blog. I'm going to try and run through this a little bit quicker because we've been going for a while, and I've still got probably a good 20 pages in here to go through. These aren't bad. I think that I may put this one in, maybe both of these. They're just real simple. Yeah, they're probably 5-minute poses. These are actually me doing diagrams, studying from when Carl draws in class. He'll draw like anatomy lessons, and I tend to draw what he's drawing to kind of study what he's doing, try and internalize it. It's like taking notes in any class. Let's see here. This was just a pose that I thought was interesting, and I made notes to it because it got me thinking about the fact that the twist that's going on with you've got the torso facing this way, you've got the hip twisted out facing this way, then you've got the knee, which normally the knee and the feet end up being in line with each other, but the fact that they were actually leaning their energy, they were pushing forward on their legs, so that you've got the angle of the upper thigh coming this way, but then you've got the lower leg coming down and the foot turning away from the figure. So that's a really interesting twist there. It takes a lot of, energy to do that without breaking your foot. And I don't think I conveyed it that well, but I thought it was really, really interesting. And my note in here was what's happening to the bones when this twist is happening. So this was a note I made for myself for deeper research in terms of anatomy. Saw a quick comment in there. Oh, the Asian Rice Cake says, hi, Jeremy. I got the Walt Reid book because of you, and it looks awesome. Thanks. Well, you know what? I'm happy to recommend it. Someone in my figure drawing class recommended it to me, and even though I had seen the book around before, I'd seen it in art stores, I didn't do a deep dive until I sat down, looked at hers, looked at the kind of study she was doing because of it, and it really got me thinking about doing a deeper dive on the primary forms, the fundamental volumes, the cubes, the cylinders, the spheres, and how to use them to properly construct a human form. This one, I think I'll go ahead and post, specifically because it's got notes that I feel are useful to share online. Like I was thinking about the connection of the joints. Like if I can break down, after I do like a really light gesture of a figure, if I can break down where are all of the joints and how they relate to each other, that helps me start blocking in the structure. That helps me blocking in not necessarily this, it's kind of like keeping in mind the skeleton in terms of how it relates to these, to these cylinders, these spheres, and all these forms that make up the body. Like if I make sure that I properly depict them and locate them in space, that gives me a leg up in terms of drawing the body. And also I made a note here that something that I'm still tussling with is the idea that the pelvis is both a major volume of the form in terms of being the lower part of the torso, but it's also a transitional form. It's a joint in the sense that much like the shoulder attaches to the shoulder attaches to the rib cage, that if you look at the way that the thighs attach to the pelvis, this major form is also a large chunk of it is made up by those hips. But those hips they move around the pelvis. It's a transitional form. It's a joint like the elbow, except more complicated. And that's something for me to really think about, because one of the things that make it difficult to describe volume is change in direction. Because even if you can describe a volume one way, like I've got a little tube of string here. If you can describe a volume as, okay, it's moving towards me in space and it's got a top and a side and a front, when you have this thing change direction in the middle of its form, that transitional area, just learning how to properly describe light and anatomy turning around those things can be very challenging. So it's one of the main things I struggle with in figure drawing class. I'm sorry if you lost that. I said it's one of the main things I struggle with in figure drawing class. I realized I said it as I was turning away from the camera, and the mic is right next to it, so you might have lost that little bit there. I try to remember to stay close to the camera so that you guys can hear me as I'm talking. Taking a quick sip of water. All right, let's hustle up. Well, you wanted some backsides. It's a male backside, American swordfish, but there you go. You know, quid pro quo, some male booty for everyone else. You know, a little bit of male, a little bit of female. Got to learn how to draw all the different forms. I like these. These are shorter poses. They were maybe they were 5s, I think, but they've got nice gestural feel to them. So they may not all be anatomically great, but I think I will put these in. Here we go. A more rounder model. And you're not looking at this blurry. This is because I blurred this out. I smeared it to try and soften the tones. Really, there should be a little sharp highlight in here for it to return back into crispness. But yeah, here we go. I think that this one's not bad. Maybe this one and these two are worth putting in. This one isn't a bad drawing, but this got a little bit too... It got clumsy. It's not nuanced in terms of it describing the anatomy. It's a little bit soft and blocky and not as descriptive as it should be. So I don't really like this one that much, but I think I may just photograph these two for the blog. Let's see. What's interesting is seeing the change in here. Like, I think these were poses that were done at the end of the night with a curvier model, and then I just had this much left over on the page, and the following night we had a more slender model doing 5-minute poses. You can kind of see the transition from where I end at one night in class to where I start in the other. Like, the nice thing is by the end of the night I really get down to the primary, what do I need to say and how am I saying it, and I'm able to get what I'm going for in terms of saying more with fewer lines. Maybe I'm getting soft in my old age because I'm actually liking more of the drawings in here. Usually I tend to be pretty harsh on what I am and I'm not going to put in the blog. This one, I don't feel the need to put into a blog, but as you've seen me when I do my bad figure drawing fixes, that if the model takes a break and I have time, I will redraw the same pose multiple times trying to get it right, trying to fix it. So that was one of these during the break, me coming in and redrawing the first one I did. Let's see what else we got here. This one, kind of a longer, thinner model. I did a horrible job of creating the volumes of her breasts. I was focused on this one in terms of it being pulled up with her arm up, but even that one, it was one of those weird 3/4 turns where the 3/4 makes it difficult because you're really trying to say, well, am I seeing more of the side or am I seeing more of the front? Normally a 3/4 is like a great view because it gives you both, but in this case I had trouble conveying it. This one did not come out well. It was a 10-minute pose and it felt like it was a waste of 10 minutes. But sometimes you need that. You need to fail, fall, crash, fireball a little bit in order to learn. Sometimes I do a bad drawing, and then right afterwards, it gives me something to focus on. If I'm thinking about how I failed in that drawing in the moment, the nice thing is that the model's got another pose coming next. And I say, all right, I'm going to make it a point to not fail at that again. Let's see here. Ion Rocks chimes in. How you want it to be versus what it is. Yeah, that's very true. But here's an interesting idea that I've been thinking about in figure drawing class, because this drawing was a 15-minute pose. The model gave a great pose. During the break, I sat down, I did this sketch of me trying to correct all the things that I did wrong in this drawing, and I got more done. Now, why is it that when the model's posing in front of me, which should be easier because I'm getting all the reference, do I do a crappier drawing? Then when the model's taking a break, I do a smaller drawing, but it's got more detail and more of everything, that it feels more finished and has better anatomy in it. And that, what it comes down to, is the question you asked about a drawing being what I want versus what it is. And a lot of times when you're in front of the model, my thing is not 100% knowing what I want. And what I mean by that is, with figure drawing, hopefully someone has told you this before, you're not drawing what you see, you're drawing what the model's doing. You're creating your own version of a story of it. You're not trying to just copy like a camera. But if you are, when you first start, I know for me, I go and I just start attacking the form, and I'm thinking about the gesture, but I don't necessarily go deeper into that thought of what is this person's body really saying? And if what their body is saying is different from what I'm putting down on paper, then to correct that and say, I want it to be closer to what they're doing, or to say, I want to express this other thing because I think it's more interesting than drawing it exactly like I see it. And the ability to make those decisions early on in a drawing, to actually decide what you want to say, I think that that's a big difference and something I struggle with. But being able to make those decisions versus just copying what you observe is where you can really push your work into a stronger, more stellar atmosphere. I think that that's the big difference there. So yeah, a lot of times it's not just the drawing isn't what I want to say, but me not knowing what I want to say. So that's a big thing. You got to know what you want to say before you can say it. So let's see, what else we got here. I see Ozato Devil popping in. Thanks for stopping in and joining us. Do I do the gestures first in those 15-minute sessions? Well, with every drawing I do, it doesn't matter whether it's a 2-minute pose, a 5-minute pose, an 8, 10, or a 15. I always do a gesture. So there's always a gesture that I'm putting into the figure. But a lot of times with the longer poses, when I do those gestures, I'm trying to draw lightly, because if I'm doing a longer pose, like for instance, this drawing is a good example. I don't know how well you can see, but I draw all the way down to the figure's feet on here. There is actually an area where you can very faintly see their feet. The legs kind of disappear a little bit, but there is an area here that's very lightly with tone where you can see the left leg, which is close to us, and you can kind of see where the right leg, which is both bent and going forward, tucks in behind it a little bit. Right here, there's very lightly indicated where the wrist is resting, and then the hand on, that's coming out of it. These are all very lightly drawn. A lot of times for me, the challenge in gesture drawing is to draw both light and dynamic and direct. Because when I'm trying to really get, this is how it feels, and this is what it's doing, and this is how it's turning, I tend to press harder. And that's something that I'm constantly fighting against because I'm heavy-handed. So one of the things I'm continually battling with, and something I keep in mind every time a class starts, is to draw light and fast. I want to get the energy that a gesture has, but I want to have the lightness that you would need if you're doing a longer pose and you need to leave a lot of white so you can model the form. So that's one of the things is I'm a little bit too delicate when I'm drawing these longer poses, and I'm trying to find a nice balance between energy versus delicacy. Because if I come in with energy, I end up drawing harder, darker lines, and I kind of push the figure and lock it into something that it isn't necessarily what I want it to be yet. I don't necessarily have as much time to refine it and sculpt it a little bit. This one I think I'm going to put in because I really do feel like I did a genuinely decent job of. I mean, you can see the fact that I spent almost all the time on this particular shoulder, the shoulder blades, the shoulder, and then this whole arm. But the main focus on this drawing, as I said, I'm just going to work on transitional forms, going up into this joint, creating the turn from this joint to that, going from the elbow down to the arm. And I actually it's a very incomplete drawing, but I feel like it expressed what I would want to express. Like if I were to render the whole form with that level of turn and form to it, the challenge is you don't want to render some areas so detailed that they jump out. I would say the only thing that has too much energy in it is the Teres. Is this the Teres Major or the Teres Minor? I can never remember if they're named because of size or because of one being higher or lower, but I think it's the Teres Major, which is a muscle that comes out of the shoulder blades and turns in. Or actually, you know what? This could just be the turning of the latissimus dorsi. See that right there? The fact that I have anatomical questions that I don't know the answer to, this is the kind of thing that I would sit down and pull out an anatomy book and study to try and understand what I'm seeing here. Am I seeing the Teres Minor? Am I seeing the Teres Major? Or am I seeing the latissimus dorsi? Because either way, you're seeing the muscles from the shoulder going into the arm from the back. Kind of the way that your pecs will go into go up underneath the deltoid as well from the front. But overall, this one I'm pretty pleased with. Let's see here. Ion Rocks also mentions, I used to have a terrible time just letting, I'm assuming you're saying letting go and flowing. Autocorrect often mangles chat messages. I am aware of that. Yeah, it's a constant battle to tell yourself to let go, particularly when you're working with a model, because that timed intensity it's challenging. So it's one of those things where honestly the Iron Rock says, yes, autocorrect is horrible. Figure drawing class is not just about your drawing skills. It's also about sort of your mental space and how you handle problem solving on the fly. Because a lot of times it's me not just thinking about how I'm moving the pencil, but thinking about the mental aspects of what I'm trying to convey. Like I mentioned before about the story of the figure. It's about trying to figure out anatomical things. It's about trying to figure out details. It's about trying to figure out how to use the energy of what I'm trying to lay down in terms of how the strokes, how aggressive they are in terms of what they communicate. This one is a not necessarily bad drawing, but the fact that like the way that the light that rounds underneath the breast is very poorly executed, the fact that this nipple is hanging down while this one is pointing up. Yeah, they would be facing in different directions, but I feel like this one would be significantly higher, particularly with the shoulder up and pulling the breast up. In fact, this is one of those interesting things where I think the torso is leaning this way, which is why this is lower, but the anatomy is pulling it up higher. And remember earlier on I said, the problem with drawing is that sometimes you end up with a collection of body parts versus an actual full figure. I went down here and I did much more, like specifically try to do a diagram of how the breasts were rounding around the form. And part of it's the fact that on the left breast, it was rounding off to the side and I didn't really convey that well. But all of what's going in here, I was trying to understand because it was something that had the potential to be a good drawing. You know, the thighs are good. What's going on in here with the obliques is interesting, but anatomically it doesn't all hold together. And so I don't think I'm going to put this one in, but this one was an important study for me. And this is a drawing that I would normally come back and do more studies for. So maybe you'll see it again in the Fixing Bad Figure Drawing series. This one was a 10. I don't know why I got so little done on it. Not a great drawing. Hey, funny that we've been talking about letting go, because this was a 15-minute pose. And the note I made to myself is to let go of this to find this. Now this one has all of the anatomy, but it's very, very stiff. The breasts aren't wrapping around the torso. The gesture feels kind of just stuck. And the proportions, if you compare like the upper torso versus the pelvis and the legs, and these legs are just tiny in comparison. It's like, it's all out of proportion. And what I'm trying to do is not draw these stiff drawings anymore. I'm trying to let go of documenting all of the parts and trying to go to having it feel of a whole, having it feel of a piece, having it feel in proportion, having all the volumes feel like they're going in proper directions in space. So this one was an important lesson for me, and I think that I may photograph this for the blog with the note in it, because that's interesting. On its own, I would not post this drawing, but I think that these two together express something of me trying the ongoing educational aspect of figure drawing. When you talk about gestures, these are some 5-minute poses here, and for the most part, they're all really nice, and there isn't any one in here that I think I would normally pick to put on, but I think I will photograph this because I don't think there's been a while. I've been leaning more towards some of the better executed drawings for the blog, and it's been a while since I've just posted a sheet of just gestures. So I think I'll put that one in there. Let's see. Here, the model gave us some really tough, challenging poses. I remember this night, and I remember the fact that I had a lot of bad drawings because we had a really good model. Sometimes a model is flexible, does really dynamic things with their bodies, and you're just chasing, you know? And it's like you're fighting to keep up with them, and the model's just kicking your ass. Not in a bad way. I mean, she's there to give you good work, to give you good dynamic inspiration, but sometimes the model's just too good and you can't hang. And this was one of those nights. Like, she handed us her ass, and you could tell she was sweating, putting in work, but she's like, if I'm gonna work, you guys are gonna work. So those are great nights. Those are some of the things I love, when the model really is just putting us through our paces. Let's see, checking the chat here. Mr. J has popped into the chat. Said, I'm not sure how to go about anatomy and figure drawing. How do you balance figure drawing and anatomy studies? Do you focus on drawing things at all angles? Well, honestly, I start with the gesture. I'd start with gesture and proportion because those are two of the things I'm worst at. I don't know if you caught earlier parts of the video, but somebody mentioned that I had recommended The Figure by Walt Reid, and I'm going to grab that book. It's on my bookshelf over here. So this is the book, The Figure by Walt Reid. A lot of it is a lot of the stuff that if you've seen any of Andrew Loomis, particularly Figure Drawing for All It's Worth, it goes into more detail of the constructive phase, constructing the actual volumes. But if you look at these images on the cover in terms of first this basic mannequin and then going into a more like anatomically sculpted, so it has more of a human form, it's not as blocky, it's not as primitive. This is sort of what I go for when I'm doing figure drawings in class and when I'm doing studies on my own. And what I do is I start with this, and then I ask myself, what's wrong? What don't I know? And I will go in and I'll do detailed drawings. You'll see some of them if you actually go back and watch the replay. I don't know if you've seen all of this video, but if you see some of the earlier drawings, you can see in there that what I'll do is I'll take these very simple drawings and I will go study into anatomical detail inside them. Like even this figure that's here on the cover, this is something I had picked up from a book called Anatomy for the Artist by Sarah Simblett, but she calls it Invisible Forms. And I have a drawing that I keep clipped above my drawing board that I look at because this is what I go to if I do a drawing and I don't understand the anatomy. For instance, I drew this pose, but it did not come out well. And so if you see the fact that I went and I drew bones inside of the figure, what I'll do is I will draw bones inside the figure, and then I'll do a whole separate drawing with drawing muscles attached to those bones. So I start with the gesture, and then if the gesture does not feel the way that I want it to, I look at what's going on with it inside, and I will do detailed drawings of both the bones and the musculature to try and figure out how they're making that surface form. So I kind of like, I start with the outside, then I go to the inside, and then I go back to the outside. I'm going inside out. I do think that it is a worthwhile practice to simply do anatomy studies, from a figure drawing book. Another one of my go-tos, this again was a recommendation from Carl Ganass, Atlas of Human Anatomy for the Artist by Stephen Peck. Let's see here. I do think that it is worthwhile to copy studies like this out of a book, to simply just look at the human form and try to draw what the anatomy is doing. And when I say copy it, I'm not saying you're trying to do a photorealistic or a rendering that looks exactly like what they do. What I mean is, let me turn back to one of the earlier pages. Now, they have very nice renderings that look almost like photographs of the actual bones and anatomical structure. But then they'll have diagrams in here. And these are just cartoons that describe what's happening with the body. And when I'm talking about copying some of the more detailed renderings like these, what I do is I would copy this, but what I'm drawing has this level of detail on it. So it's much more of me just doing a cartoon, and I'm drawing it to understand the volumes, understand the forms, understand where the muscles are placed. Another artist that's really good for that is, if you're not familiar with George Bridgman. Let's see here. Bridgman has a book called The Human Machine. I have this wrapped in wax paper because I had this in a bag in my figure drawing class, my figure drawing bag, and it got so beat up at a certain point. Like a lot of my art books get beat up, so I realized I wanted to start making like protective coverings for them so I can just take them around wherever. Now, the thing about Bridgman is when you first look at him, his stuff, he's almost like Jack Kirby. You can't really understand how he's doing what he's doing until you know a little bit more about art. Like Kirby, I didn't like Kirby when I first saw him. I thought he was a little blocky and chunky. And a lot of people don't necessarily like George Bridgman when they first see him because they're not necessarily pretty drawings. But what Bridgman is doing is he's drawing the building blocks that make up things. And I haven't done it in a good long while, but I did a period where once or twice a year, I would just sit down with this book in my spare time. I was still working on other stuff, but if I had like once a day, I would just spend 15 or 20 minutes and I would go through the book, and one by one, I would copy all the drawings in the book. I'd usually copy them with a red pencil and a white pencil. And what I would do is I would use or not white pencil, a red pencil and a blue pencil. And I would do the red pencil for the bones because it's a lighter color. Then I would do the blue pencil or pen for the actual muscles attaching them to the bones. I would just make these diagrams and charts trying to break down what Bridgman is doing. And I see Mr. J also said, I thought it was just me. Bridgman was difficult to understand. You're right about needing prior knowledge before reading his books. Well, if Bridgman was a pain in the ass for you, I would definitely check out the figure. So you'd be the second person that I've recommended to check this book out. This one is just, it's a simpler version of Bridgman. And I wouldn't say, oh, this book is better than Bridgman's. All art books are additive. Every time you take a class, every time you read a different book, you can add that to your knowledge and your arsenal of creative knowledge and information, and it'll help make things better. But yeah, this book has a lot in the early part about, it's almost as if you've ever looked at How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way, and they have the really simple anatomical details in there, this book is basically the middle ground between How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way and George Bridgman. This book gets into a lot of those more primitive forms, but it sculpts in more anatomical details. And not only does it explains to you how to actually put figures together, how to twist them, how to turn them. And it shows you both a mannequin type figure, and it shows you what the primitive forms are doing within those figures. And as it gives you that detail in a wide variety of male and female poses, it also compares it with photographs of anatomy, and it starts getting into more detailed drawings of, like, the first half is really construction. It's a lot of construction. So it'll help you a lot with the types of stuff you were struggling with Bridgman. Then later in the book, it gets into anatomical detail. And this is what I mean when I say trying to understand the major volumes first, then going into anatomy. Because if you just try to study this stuff first, you're going to end up with what I mentioned before, a collection of body parts. But if you understand the volumes of an arm, then you can start looking at, well, or the volumes of a hand or a foot. Then once you understand that, you can start looking at the individual bones and the tendons or the muscles that run through these things and that make them up. But the point is, you got to understand that larger part first. So hopefully that's useful. Check out this book. I've recommended it before. I'm sure I'll recommend it again. In fact, I'm not going to do it today because it'll take too long. But one of these days, I'm going to do you know what? That might be something I'll say for the Patreon. I'm going to do a tour of my art books. Don't worry, when I launch my Patreon campaign, you guys will be the first to know. Another page of gestures. Eric Geist. Yes, I haven't studied his work in detail, but I started watching a lot of videos from the Watts Atelier, and I know that he's one of the instructors over there. He also does a lot of great fantasy illustration. So yeah, definitely listen to his recommendations. Not checking the chat, Eric Geist was somebody who also suggested copying Bridgman through tonal representation because his drawings are chaotic. And yes, yeah, they are. They are chaotic. You kind of have to get in there and fish around to understand what he's doing. You know, this will be another one that I think I just like. These are 1 minute poses. So these went really fast, super primitive gestures, just trying to get down to the essence of it. And I think one of the challenges is learning how to do this at the start of any drawing, to no matter what drawing you're starting, whether it's a 20-minute drawing or it's going to be a 2-hour, 3-hour thing you're working on, is to attack it with the same pose, same energy that you do a 1 minute gesture drawing. So when I say that, I say it with me saying that I don't do a good job at conveying that energy in my drawings, but it's something that I'm aware of and I'm trying to get better at. See, these were probably 5s. Yeah, I don't think there's anything on this page that's really worth blog worthy. These are more of those 1 minute poses. I remember because I was keeping track. The model didn't have their had a timer for just each minute, but didn't have a timer that could say how long until the session was done. And we were doing like 25 minutes, so we were doing 25 1 minute poses. So I was just keeping check marks on my page as I went. Let's see. This is probably the most detailed 1 minute drawing I've ever got because I got in here getting the details of the feet and the ankles. Actually, you know what? That's a lie. This was the last pose in the set, so I can guarantee you I kept drawing when the model finished. So the rest of them probably were as loose as these, but then I probably went in here and did more detail afterwards. I bet you I kept running. Let's see here. Getting close to the end here. So if you guys have any more questions before we wrap it up, let me know. You know what? You might find it crazy. You might think it's being overcritical. But I look at this drawing and there's nothing bad about it, but I don't think there's anything particularly dynamic about it either. My instinct is to not post this drawing. Like it just I don't know. Maybe I'm being too hard on myself, but there's something about it that feels it's lacking something. It's lacking fire. Maybe it's lacking contrast. And this is what happens when I draw too lightly on the page and instead of really attacking it. But this one I feel is worth posting. I'm just getting that sense of the they were a very thin model, so the fact that I could see the ribs in there, but being able to get in there and depict that subtle change of the anatomy, as opposed to just coming in and putting a hard line and saying, that's a rib, that's a rib, that's a rib. The fact that I could actually, I'm getting better at using tone to describe these changes in surface direction is something that's blog worthy. It's me moving in the direction I want to move in. Now, I remember being very unhappy with this when I did it in class because the drawing itself wasn't coming out well. It was very much like the previous drawing that I showed you that I felt didn't have any real strength or energy to it. And I thought, well, I'm not clearly defining my lights and my darks. So I sort of went in and just sculpted around and outlined, like, here's this form facing the light surface, here's this form facing the light surface, and then just blocking around the areas where it turns into shadow. And some people who saw it from a distance were like, oh, hey, that's kind of cool. But the problem is that it's technique-y. Technique-y, coming back to, like I always mention the blood splatters as my example of, it's not draftsmanship, it's a technique. It's just using blocks and making cool shapes, but it's still not describing the form very well. So for that reason, this one isn't going in. It's something you need to make a decision for yourself. I can't tell you don't use technique. Technique isn't bad. Technique is just a tool. But it's very possible for technique to become a crutch where you're doing these technique-y things that look cool but don't necessarily say anything. And you need to decide for yourself, do I want my work to really say something or not? Because if your work is all technique but no structure, people that know how to draw will be able to tell. You might get people who say, oh, that looks cool, but the question is, how much do you want to grow as an artist? If looking cool is what you want and you want your stuff to be cool, that I don't have a right to judge you for that. Everyone wants praise for the work that they do. But I would like my work to not only look cool, but to be structurally sound and artistically have a voice to it. And I think that that's something that can be lost if you just do technique. Or rather, if you just pursue or chase technique. I like this drawing. This one feels of a sense of completeness in terms of it's not as blocky or choppy as some of the other ones that I kind of fight with. And this one as well. I was surprised I was able to get some more tone in there than I usually am able to get into a figure. And I mean, in like a 5-minute pose, these were 5s. And it is possible that that tone all came from this being the last pose in the drawing, and I might have been shading that while the model was on her break. But I think this one was an honest 5. And it's weird. Sometimes I am really trying to use tone and put in shadow. Sometimes I'm trying to leave the figure open as much as possible and describe the figure just using the edges of the form and only having shadow around the edges. So these are two interesting contrasts, the one above and the one below. They're two things that I both pursue, and there's slightly different ways of handling the form. So, all right. These are some 2-minute poses. When you're talking about Bridgman being really blocky and chaotic, this is like a Bridgman drawing right here. It's blocky, it's chaotic, and I was trying to do a better job of understanding what I failed getting in this drawing, and it's still not any better. And then I think at some point I reached into my bag and I pulled out the Bridgman drawing I keep in my drawing bag, and I think I was doing these poses studying from some Bridgman drawings, because it's having one of those nights where things were kind of slipping out of the groove, out of the pocket. There's times when I feel like it's on point and the drawings are all coming out well. Sometimes I have nights where things feel like a train wreck, and that's okay. Sometimes usually I lean into the train wreck, because if I'm having a night where things are going all wrong, it's a chance for me to understand myself better. Because if I can figure out what I'm doing and learn how to fix it, it means that when I work on comics and I'm not happy with how the comics are coming out, I can lean into those same things. Like at a certain point, when I first started, figure drawing and comics felt very, very separate. Now, when I'm working on comics, I find myself very much keeping in mind the things I learned in class and trying to apply them. They've slowly come more and more merged together. These were some 5-minute poses, and I wasn't happy with how almost any of them came out, because as you can see, for all these, I ended up doing quick thumbnails, redrawing all of them. The proportions were really, really bad. That's because we had a really interesting model who was an older gentleman. He has a broad rib cage, but then narrow waist, so he's both long and wide, and also older. And there's some poses he'll take where he looks like frail, and there's some poses he takes where he looks incredibly strong and powerful. And he has a very transformative body, and that's challenging to depict. So, nothing from there for the blog. Yeah, I don't think there's anything on this particular page that I'm gonna put in the blog either. I think that these were, again, me doing studies from the instructor's diagrams he was doing on the board as he was lecturing. So, some 2-minute poses from the end of the night. And I don't think that there's anything in here that I really want to post on the blog either. So let's see. All right, guys. Well, that's it. That was a particularly long figure drawing purge, because I had all the drawings I did from July, as well as a lot of the ones I did from August, because I hadn't been pulling them off the drawing board as I was going. So, but that's fine. There's gonna be a little bit of a gap, just a few weeks off before the my fall session of classes begins, and I'll be showing you some more stuff then. But next week we'll be back to comic book work. So that is it for now. Thank you for spending some time with me. Grab an anatomy book or go to a figure drawing class and go be creative.